Sarah stood before the antique floor-length mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed down the intricate lace of her wedding dress. The morning sun streamed through the aged windows of Sterling Vineyards' bridal suite, casting a golden glow across her features. At her feet, Max, her German Shepherd service dog, sat alert and dignified in his custom-made doggy tuxedo, the burgundy boatie perfectly matching the wedding's color scheme. "What do you think, boy?" she whispered, catching his reflection in the mirror. Max's tail thumped against the hardwood floor, his intelligent brown eyes never leaving her face. Sarah smiled, remembering the day 5 years ago when Max had first come into her life, a highly trained service dog who would change everything. Since then, he'd been her constant guardian, alerting her to oncoming seizures before they struck, staying by her side through countless hospital visits, and eventually leading her to Michael. The thought of Michael brought fresh butterflies to her stomach. She could still picture their first meeting with perfect clarity that rainy afternoon in the local coffee shop where she'd stopped to warm up during one of her walks with Max. Michael had been there, laptop open, deeply engrossed in grading papers for his high school English class. Max, typically reserved around strangers, had broken protocol for the first and only time in his service career, gently nudging Michael's hand with his nose. The startled teacher had looked up, met Sarah's embarrassed gaze, and the rest, as they say, was history. Outside the bridal suite, Sterling Vineyards was coming alive with activity. The sprawling property, with its rows of budding grape vines stretching toward the horizon, had been transformed into a wedding venue that perfectly balanced rustic charm with elegant sophistication. White wooden chairs lined the outdoor ceremony space, each row end decorated with hanging mason jars filled with wildflowers and baby's breath. An arch of intertwined grapevines and roses stood ready at the altar, its natural beauty framed by the rolling hills beyond. Sarah's mother appeared in the doorway, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Oh, sweetheart," she breathed, "you look absolutely perfect." Her gaze shifted to Max, and she smiled. "And you, sir, are the most handsome best man I've ever seen." "He knows it, too." Sarah laughed, reaching down to scratch behind Max's ears. "Don't you, buddy?" The next hour passed in a whirlwind of final preparations. Bridesmaids in flowing burgundy dresses fluttered about the suite, helping with last-minute touch-ups. The photographer captured candid moments: Sarah's father's first look at his daughter in her wedding dress, the careful positioning of her grandmother's pearl hairpin, and countless shots of Max maintaining his dignified watch over the proceedings. Through it all, Max remained the picture of calm authority, his training evident in every measured movement. Only those who knew him well might have noticed how his ears occasionally twitched at sudden sounds, or how his eyes regularly swept the room in a habitual security check. But these subtle behaviors were so familiar to Sarah that she hardly noticed them anymore, but they were constant reminders of the depth of his dedication. As the guests began to arrive, their voices drifting up from the courtyard below, Sarah watched through the window as Michael greeted them. He looked devastating handsome in his black tuxedo, his usually unruly dark hair finely tamed for the occasion. Even from this distance, she could see his nervous habit of adjusting his cuffs, and her heart swelled with affection. "He's a good man," her father said, coming to stand beside her. "The way he loves both of you, that's something special." Sarah nodded, remembering Michael's proposal 6 months earlier. He had taken them both on a hike to their favorite overlook, Max trotting happily ahead on the trail. At the top, Michael had turned to her and said, "I'm not just asking to marry you, Sarah. I'm asking to be part of your team, you and Max, the package deal. Because I've never seen a love as pure as what you two have, and I want to spend my life being worthy of inclusion in that circle." The memory brought fresh tears to her eyes, and Max immediately pressed against her leg, offering comfort. Sarah dried her eyes carefully, mindful of her makeup, and gave him a reassuring pat. "I'm okay, boy." Happy tears. A knock at the door signaled it was almost time. The wedding planner, Clara, poked her head in with a clipboard in hand. "We're ready whenever you are," she announced. The string quartet is in position, the guests are seated, and Michael, as she consulted her clipboard with a grin, pacing nervously at the altar. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing her dress one final time. She looked down at Max, who sat perfectly positioned at her side, alert and ready for whatever his human needed. "Well, partner," she said softly, "ready to help me down another aisle?" Max's tail wagged once, decisively, as if to say there was never any question about it. This was his job, not just the official service dog duties, but the deeper mission of protecting and supporting his beloved human through every moment of her life, whether mundane or magnificent. As Sarah's father offered his arm and the bridesmaids lined up in the hallway, no one could have guessed that this perfect day was about to take an unexpected turn. No one except, perhaps, the German shepherd in the burgundy boatie, whose heightened senses were already beginning to detect something amiss in the carefully orchestrated celebration. For now, though, the sun shone brightly over Sterling Vineyards, the roses on the arch dropped delicate petals onto the ceremony aisle, and 200 guests waited to witness a love story that had brought together not just two hearts, but three: a teacher who believed in the power of stories, a woman who had learned to live fully despite her challenges, and a dog whose devotion would soon be tested in ways no one could have anticipated. The ceremony concluded with joyful tears and applause as Michael kissed his bride beneath the rose-draped arch. Max maintained his perfect sitting position beside Sarah throughout the exchange of vows, though his ears occasionally twitched, picking up subtle sounds that escaped human detection. As the newlyweds made their way back down the aisle to the string quartet's rendition of All You Need Is Love, Golden Hour began to paint the vineyard in warm amber hues. Inside the reception hall, the staff of Sterling Vineyards worked with practiced efficiency to transform the space. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over tables draped in ivory linens, while burgundy and gold accents echoed throughout the decor. At the center of it all stood an empty cake table, awaiting its crowning glory, a masterpiece that would soon become the center of an unexpected drama. In the kitchen's back entrance, Thomas Weber lingered in the shadows, his once pristine chef's coat now wrinkled and stained. Just 3 weeks ago, he had been Sterling Vineyards' celebrated head pastry chef, known for creating edible works of art that graced the covers of wedding magazines. Now, after being fired for showing up intoxicated one too many times, he watched his replacement, Jessica Chen, receive praise for the wedding cake he believed should have been his creation. "Magnificent work," Jessica, the venue manager, gushed, inspecting the 5-tier masterpiece. "The hand-painted gold details are extraordinary." Thomas's fingers curled into fists as he observed the cake from his hidden vantage point. The elegant creation stood nearly 4 feet tall, each tier a different flavor chosen specifically to represent moments in Sarah and Michael's relationship. The bottom tier, dark chocolate with espresso buttercream, commemorated their coffee shop meeting. The second layer featured vanilla bean cake with wildflower honey, inspired by their first date at a local farmer's market. Each successive tier told another chapter of their story, culminating in a delicate top layer of lemon lavender, representing their engagement in a hillside flower field. But Thomas knew something no one else did. During the ceremony, while the kitchen staff was busy preparing appetizers, he had managed to slip in unnoticed. His special addition to the cake's filling would ensure this wedding would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. The thought brought a bitter smile to his face as he watched the cake being carefully wheeled into position. As guests filed into the reception hall, Max's behavior began to shift. The usually composed service dog grew restless during the cocktail hour, his nose working overtime as new scents filled the air. Sarah, caught up in receiving congratulations and posing for photos, initially didn't notice her companion's subtle signs of distress. "What a beautiful wedding," gushed her Aunt Margaret, pulling her into a tight embrace. "And Max looks so distinguished in his little tuxedo. Though he seems a bit anxious, is he okay?" Sarah glanced down at Max, noting how he kept turning his head toward the cake display. "He's probably just overwhelmed with all the excitement," she said, though a small crease appeared between her brows. In 5 years, she'd learned to trust Max's instincts implicitly. The reception progressed into dinner service, with servers weaving between tables delivering plates of locally sourced cuisine. Max's agitation continued to grow. His ears remained flattened against his head, and his usual perfect posture was replaced by a tense, alert stance. When the photographer attempted to capture a shot of the couple with their cake, Max positioned himself firmly between Sarah and the dessert table. "Come on, boy. Move aside," Michael urged gently, but Max stood his ground. A few guests chuckled at what they assumed was the dog's interest in the cake itself, but Sarah recognized this behavior. It was the same protective stance he took when he sensed one of her seizures approaching, or that time he detected a gas leak in their apartment. "Has he ever acted like this before?" Michael asked quietly. his arm around Sarah's waist. "Not at a social event," she replied, watching as Max's nose twitched rapidly. "His training is specifically designed to prevent this kind of behavior unless something's wrong." From his position near the kitchen doors, Thomas watched the scene unfold with growing unease. He hadn't counted on the presence of a service dog, hadn't even noticed Max during his earlier surveillance of the venue. Now, as he observed the German Shepherd's increasingly agitated behavior, a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. The dog's distress was beginning to attract more attention. Guests who had been milling around the cake display gradually shifted away, throwing concerned glances in Max's direction. His reputation as a highly trained service animal was well known among friends and family, making his unusual behavior all the more noteworthy. "Perhaps we should move the cake-cutting ceremony up," suggested the wedding coordinator, checking her watch nervously, "before the dog gets more upset." But Max's distress only intensified as servers moved closer to the cake. His first bark, sharp and authoritative, cut through the dinner chatter like a thunderclap. Heads turned, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and Sarah felt her heart begin to race. In 5 years of service, Max had never once barked at a public event. "Something's wrong," she whispered to Michael, her hand tightening on his arm. "He's trying to tell us something." In the kitchen doorway, Thomas began to retreat, his face pale. He hadn't anticipated this level of scrutiny. The sophisticated revenge he'd planned was quickly unraveling, all because of a dog's superior senses. Max's second bark was accompanied by a low growl, his focus unwavering from the towering cake. Guests began to murmur, phones appeared to record the unusual spectacle, and the wedding coordinator hurried over with a look of barely concealed panic. "Mrs. Thompson," she began, "I must insist." But Sarah raised a hand to silence her, her eyes fixed on Max. Years of partnership had taught her to read every nuance of his behavior, and right now, every line of his body screamed danger. This wasn't excitement, anxiety, or a bid for attention. This was Max doing exactly what he'd been trained to do: protect his people. "We need to check that cake," she said firmly, her face pale but determined. "Something's very wrong." As if to emphasize her words, Max let out another series of sharp barks, his message clear to anyone who knew him: "Don't touch it. Don't go near it. This is not safe." In the growing tension of the moment, no one noticed Thomas slipping out through the kitchen's back door, his grand plan of revenge crumbling in the face of a dog's unwavering dedication to duty. The elegant reception had transformed into something else entirely, a testament to the extraordinary bond between a service dog and his handler, and a reminder that sometimes the most important warnings come not in words, but in barks. The cake, still beautiful and seemingly perfect, stood as an innocent-looking centerpiece to a drama that was about to unfold. As Sarah and Michael exchanged worried glances, and guests gathered in concerned clusters, Max maintained his vigilant guard, knowing his most important service, yet to his beloved humans, was only beginning to unfold. The elegant reception hall at Sterling Vineyards had transformed into a scene of mounting tension. Max's barking, initially dismissed as excitement, had taken on a more urgent tone that Sarah knew all too well. It was the same bark she'd heard the night he'd woken her at 3 a.m., just minutes before a major seizure. The same alert that had saved her from tumbling down the stairs during a dizzy spell last winter. "Everyone, please," the wedding coordinator attempted to regain control of the situation, her professional smile strained. "Why don't we all move to the dance floor while we sort this out?" But Sarah stood her ground, one hand resting on Max's tense shoulders. Her mind flashed back to the day she'd first met him at the service dog training center. The trainer had explained how German Shepherds possess up to 225 million scent receptors, compared to a human's mere 5 million. "They can detect things we can't even imagine," the trainer had said. "The key is learning to trust their instincts." Michael moved closer to his bride, his earlier embarrassment replaced by concern. "Remember last year," he murmured. "The gas leak." Sarah nodded, the memory crystal clear. Max had refused to enter their apartment one evening, planting himself in the hallway and blocking their path with the same determined stance he was showing now. His persistence had led them to call maintenance, who discovered a potentially lethal gas leak from their ancient stove. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael addressed the murmuring crowd, his teacher's voice carrying authority. "I know this is unusual, but we need to take this seriously. Max isn't just a pet, he's a highly trained service animal with a proven track record. From the back of the room, Sarah's mother stepped forward. "Sarah, honey, I know how much you trust Max, but it's just a wedding cake." Jessica is an excellent pastry chef. "It's not about Jessica," Sarah interrupted, watching Max's continued focus on the cake. Her mind raced through his training episodes, particularly the scent detection work. Max had been trained to alert not just to her medical conditions, but to any chemical or substance that could pose a threat to her compromised immune system. The wedding coordinator consulted her schedule nervously. "The cake cutting is meant to happen in 20 minutes. We have 200 guests waiting." Max's barking intensified, his body practically vibrating with urgency. A few guests had their phones out, recording the spectacle, while others whispered among themselves. Sarah caught fragments of their conversations. "Never seen him act like this. Remember when he detected that allergic reaction at the Christmas party? Should we call someone?" Sarah closed her eyes, remembering another training session. The instructor had hidden various substances throughout a room, some harmless, some potentially dangerous. Max had ignored the distractions, consistently alerting only to genuine threats, but his accuracy rate had been nearly perfect. "We need to check the cake," she announced firmly. "Not just the outside, the inside too." "But it'll ruin it," the coordinator protested. "Better a ruined cake than..." Michael let the sentence hang, his arm tightening around Sarah's waist. Jessica Chen, the pastry chef, had been summoned from the kitchen. She stood examining her creation with puzzled concern. "I don't understand. I followed every safety protocol, used only the finest ingredients." "Could anyone else have accessed the cake?" Michael asked. Jessica's face paled slightly. "Well, the kitchen was mostly empty during the ceremony. We were all watching from the back door, because it was such a beautiful wedding." Max's barking reached a fever pitch as two servers approached with cake knives for the traditional cutting ceremony. Sarah felt her chest tighten. She'd learned to trust Max's instincts over even her own judgment. In 5 years, he'd never been wrong. Not once. "Stop," she called out, her voice ringing through the hall. "Nobody touches that cake until we've had it checked." The venue manager, who had been hovering uncertainly nearby, finally stepped forward. "I've called local law enforcement," he admitted. "Given Max's certification and history, well, I thought it better to be safe than sorry." As if on cue, 2 police officers entered the reception hall, followed by a smaller figure in a white coat who introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Martinez from the county health department. "We got a call about a possible contamination situation." For the next 15 minutes, the reception hall held its collective breath as Dr. Martinez and her team carefully examined the cake. Max never wavered from his alert stance, though his barking subsided to a low growl when the professionals took over. The moment of discovery came with a sharp intake of breath from Dr. Martinez. Her preliminary test of the cake's filling had revealed something that made her face darken with concern. "This cake has been tampered with," she announced grimly. "There are significant traces of a toxic substance that could have caused severe illness to anyone who consumed it." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Sarah felt her knees weaken, and both Michael and Max pressed closer to support her. "But if your dog hadn't alerted us," Dr. Martinez shook her head in amazement. "The symptoms wouldn't have been apparent until hours later. Given the number of guests, this could have been catastrophic." The venue manager was already on his phone, reviewing security footage from the kitchen. It didn't take long to spot Thomas Weber's furtive entrance and exit during the ceremony. His bitter expression and suspicious movements told the rest of the story. Sarah knelt beside Max, wrapping her arms around his neck as tears spilled down her cheeks. "You saved us," she whispered into his fur. "You saved everyone." Max simply licked her cheek, his tail finally beginning to wag now that the threat had been identified and contained. To him, it was simple. He had done what he'd been trained to do, what love had taught him to do: protect his family at all costs. The wedding coordinator dabbed at her own eyes. "I am so sorry I doubted him," she said softly. "In 15 years of planning weddings, I've never seen anything like this." Michael joined them on the floor, heedless of his tuxedo pants. "I always said he was the best man a groom could ask for," he managed through a tight throat. "But this is above and beyond." As police officers collected evidence and guests alternated between shocked discussions and emotional tributes to Max's heroism, Sarah remained on the floor, with her arms around her guardian angel. She remembered the words of Max's trainer on graduation day: these dogs give their whole hearts to their humans. Sometimes that devotion reveals itself in ways we never expect. Looking up at the ruined cake that could have cast a tragic shadow over their perfect day, Sarah felt a profound gratitude that went beyond words. Max had not only protected her from daily health challenges, he had protected their entire wedding party from a vengeful act that could have ended in tragedy. The cake-cutting tradition would have to wait for a replacement dessert, but no one seemed to mind. They had witnessed something far sweeter: the pure, unfailing love of a dog for his humans, and the remarkable instincts that had turned potential disaster into a story of devotion that none of them would ever forget. As police officers led them aside to take statements, Max resumed his usual posting at Sarah's side, alert but calm now that the danger had passed. To all appearances, he was once again simply a well-trained service dog in a dapper tuxedo. But to everyone who had witnessed his actions, he had become something more: a hero whose devotion had turned a wedding day into a testament to the extraordinary bonds between humans and their four-legged guardians. The sun had begun to set over Sterling Vineyards, casting long shadows through the windows of the reception hall. In the golden light, Max's badge on his service vest caught the light, twinkling like a medal of valor. For him, it had been simply another day of doing his job, protecting the humans he loved. For everyone else, it was a moment they would never forget, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of love come not with words or fanfare, but with a bark of warning from a heart that knows no bounds. As police cars lined the circular drive of Sterling Vineyards, their red and blue lights reflecting off the twilight-darkened windows, the wedding reception had transformed into something unexpected: a celebration not just of romantic love, but of a dog's unwavering loyalty and life-saving instincts. Detective Sandra Martinez stood in the kitchen, examining the evidence while interviewing Jessica Chen, the current pastry chef. Security footage shows Thomas Weber entering at 2:47 p.m. During the ceremony, she explained, reviewing her notes. He spent approximately 12 minutes alone with the cake. Jessica wrung her hands in her flour-dusted apron. "I should have made sure the kitchen was locked. When he was fired, he threatened to make them regret it, but nobody thought he'd actually." In the main reception hall, the energy had shifted from shock to a kind of jubilant relief. Guests clustered in groups, each retelling their version of events with increasing animation. Phones buzzed with incoming texts and calls as the story spread beyond the venue's walls. Local news vans had already begun arriving, their satellite dishes stretching skyward like mechanical flowers, seeking the last rays of sunlight. "Your dog saved our lives," an elderly guest told Sarah, her eyes brimming with tears. "My granddaughter has a severe allergy if she'd eaten even a bite." Sarah could only nod, her hand never leaving Max's fur. The German Shepherd had returned to his usual calm demeanor, though he maintained a closer-than-normal position to his humans. His tuxedo was slightly rumpled now, the burgundy boatie slightly askew, but guests were treating him like royalty. Small plates of approved treats appeared from seemingly nowhere, offered by grateful attendees. Michael fielded questions from a local reporter who had managed to gain access to the reception. "Max has always been extraordinary," he explained, his arm tight around Sarah's waist. "But today he proved that love comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a warning bark that saves 200 people." The venue manager approached with his phone extended. "The story's already trending on social media," he announced. "People are calling Max a hero. A few wedding blogs have reached out for exclusive coverage." Sarah shook her head in amazement. "He doesn't know he's a hero," she said softly, watching Max accept gentle pats from admiring guests. "He was just doing what he always does, protecting his family." The police had cordoned off the kitchen as they continued their investigation. Preliminary tests confirmed what Max had detected: a substance that, while not immediately lethal, would have caused severe illness to anyone who consumed it. Thomas Weber had been apprehended at his apartment, where investigators found more evidence of his planned revenge. "We've never had anything like this happen," the venue manager admitted, running a hand through his thinning hair. "But thanks to Max, what could have been a tragedy has become, well, quite frankly, the best publicity we could have imagined. Would you consider allowing us to name our new garden ceremony space after him?" As the evening progressed, local bakeries began arriving with donated desserts, cupcakes, cookies, and even a hastily decorated but cheerful replacement wedding cake. The community's response was immediate and heartwarming, transforming potential disaster into a demonstration of kindness and support. "It's not the wedding we planned," Michael mused, watching guests dance and celebrate with renewed enthusiasm, "but somehow it's perfect anyway. How many couples can say their wedding was saved by a superhero in a tuxedo?" Sarah laughed, her first real laugh since the drama began. "He's going to be insufferably proud of himself, you know. We'll have to watch his ego." But Max remained the picture of professional dignity, accepting praise with the same calm demeanor he brought to all his duties. When a local K9 unit arrived to assist with the investigation, he acknowledged his fellow working dogs with a respectful distance, never leaving his post by Sarah's side. The wedding photographer, who had captured the entire sequence of events, was beside herself with excitement. "These photos are incredible," she gushed, showing Sarah some previews on her camera screen. The moment Max first alerted, the realization, the investigation it tells such a powerful story. Mind if I submit them to some competitions? As night fell over Sterling Vineyards, the reception took on an almost magical quality. Strings of market lights twinkled overhead, and the dance floor filled with guests who now had even more reason to celebrate. The near tragedy had reminded everyone present of life's fragility and the importance of protecting those we love. A local news anchor wrapped up her live broadcast from the venue's entrance. What started as a potential disaster was averted thanks to the remarkable instincts of a service dog named Max, reminding us all that heroes come in many forms, sometimes wearing fur and a burgundy boatie. Inside, Sarah and Michael shared their first dance to At Last by Etta James, with Max maintaining a watchful presence at the edge of the dance floor. Guests wiped away tears, though whether from the romance of the moment or the lingering emotion of the day's events, it was hard to tell. "You know," Michael whispered in Sarah's ear as they swayed to the music, "I always said I was marrying both of you. Today just proved what I've known all along. I'm the luckiest man in the world to be part of this team." Sarah smiled up at him, then over at Max, who sat alert but content, still every inch the distinguished best man despite his eventful day. The wedding might not have gone according to plan, but it had become something even more meaningful, a testament to love in all its forms, including the pure, protective devotion of a dog who had turned a potential tragedy into a story of hope, heroism, and... As midnight approached at Sterling Vineyards, the wedding celebration had evolved into something far more profound than anyone could have imagined. The replacement cake, a beautiful three-tiered creation rushed over by Sweetheart's Bakery, stood as a symbol of the community's swift response to near tragedy. Its hastily piped inscription read, "Love saves the day." With a small fondant German shepherd placed proudly beside the traditional bride and groom topper. To love in all its forms, Michael proposed, raising his champagne glass as he and Sarah prepared to cut the new cake, and to Max, who showed us that sometimes a hero walks on four legs. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Max, still dignified in his now slightly rumpled tuxedo, thumped his tail against the floor. Local news cameras captured the moment as Sarah knelt to hug him before cutting the cake, her white dress pooling around them both. "You know what's amazing?" Sarah's father remarked to the gathered guests, his voice thick with emotion. "When we first got Max, we thought he was just going to help with Sarah's medical needs. We never imagined he'd end up protecting our entire family, and today, our entire wedding party." Messages of support had flooded social media, with Wedding Horror trending locally. The venue had received calls from other couples requesting to book their hero dog-friendly space, and a local pet supply company had already offered Max a lifetime supply of premium treats. But for Sarah and Michael, the most meaningful outcome wasn't the media attention or the outpouring of community support. It was the deeper appreciation for the unique bond they shared, a love story that encompassed not just two hearts, but three, bound together by trust, devotion, and now an extraordinary act of protection. As the final songs played and guests began to depart, each stopping to pat Max one last time, Sarah watched her four-legged guardian maintain his vigilant post. Even after everything, he remained focused on his primary mission, keeping his humans safe. "Ready to go home, buddy?" she asked softly, scratching behind his ears. Max looked up at her with those soulful brown eyes, and for a moment she saw not just her service dog, but her guardian angel, her protector, her best man, and her hero, all wrapped up in one loyal package. The night air was crisp as they made their way to the decorated getaway car. Rice rained down, twinkling in the moonlight as guests cheered. Max hopped into the back seat with his usual grace, his job not quite done until his humans were safely home. As they drove away from Sterling Vineyards, Sarah reached back to touch Max's head, then squeezed Michael's hand. Their wedding day hadn't gone as planned. It had become something far more meaningful. It was a testament to the extraordinary ways love protects us, even in our most vulnerable moments, and a reminder that true heroes sometimes come wearing tuxedos and wagging tails. "I love you both," Michael said softly, glancing at his wife and their canine protector in the rearview mirror. And Max, ever vigilant, ever loyal, watched over his family as they drove into their future together, his heart full of the simple, profound joy of a duty well done.